Hey guys, Joe here, and welcome back to yet another video where today we have a world map. Great. Yay, world map. So, what am I doing today, you might be asking? Well, you already know because you looked at the title of the video. But today we are doing a scenario over here in the Middle East, actually, with Israel and Iran. This scenario is if their little little thing going on that they're doing it escalates into a full war. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about with the thing between Israel and Iran, and basically Israel wants missiles into Iran, and Iran wants missiles into Israel. They're not technically at war, but so anyway, so they're at war. They can't do anything really except for continue missile striking each other. However, Iran, um, so let's just color in Palestine on the blue because Israel is currently at war with them, and I mean I should color them yellow, I guess, but no, because now Um, Iran has declared their support for them, and Israel begins invasion of the West Bank, taking it over. However, they do not invade Gaza quite yet. Um, so Lebanon will also join the war. However, Syria will refrain from doing so as they recently, Assad got overthrown, and so they do not join the war. However, they do have some claims like here from Israel, but yeah, Israeli troops will move up into southern Lebanon, which causes Syria to get involved as a third party, not wanting further Israel advancements on their border, slowly entering into Israel and entering somewhat into northern Lebanon, claiming they are peacekeeping forces. Iran, seeing as Syria could be a problem, calls the axis of resistance into the war, which effectively, also like does that. I'm not really sure what the area Houthis control, but I think it's something like that, maybe. But anyway, Yemen is brought into the war as a fourth party, as the Houthis, which are a part of the Axis of Resistance, join the war. Now, the US doesn't like this, so that Yemen is now involved in this war. Now, the US said they wouldn't get involved in the Iran-Israel conflicts currently. However, now that Yemen is in it, the yet another party joins the war. This time it is the US and the West operating from the Djibouti and Eritrea coast. Now, why am I coloring this as occupied but not coloring in Eritrea and Djibouti as conquered? Is because the US troops are occupying it, but they're not going to war with Eritrea and Djibouti. They quickly take control of the southern area and begin fighting the Houthis over here. And Saudi Arabia, like joined the Americans, not fully joining the war, but invading. That's why I'm not coloring in any countries orange because they're not really fully joining the war. They're just sending in forces. The Omanis will also allow the US and the West to use their border to invade Yemen after US threats against them. But Iran didn't really need the Houthis, or whatever they are called. They really only needed Iraq to open up another front against the Syrians, who are now getting invaded on their border from Iraq. Also, just this is a fictional scenario, doesn't reflect my reviews and all that, blah blah blah. Anyway, Rojava quickly falls to the Iraqis and Iranis, and yet more American, Western, and Saudi forces enter Iraq from Saudi Arabia and Jordan, taking the southern area. They also come into Iraq from Kuwait, as well as Turkey, who those forces also went to Iran, and this causes an Irani declaration of war on Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Kuwait. However, though they don't really like Turkey's involvement in this, they don't fully declare war on Turkey, as that would invoke Article 5 of NATO. Same with all the other Western powers, so they will remain, if not official, part of the war. So yeah, Saudi Arabian forces will push farther into southern Iraq and begin taking over this to get into a more holdable position against their forces do not enter into Syria, as Syria is kind of cooperating with the West in exchange. Syria will get this area from. So there's a little deal happening. The West isn't also it's so the West pro-Israel, yeah. But so they made a deal with Syria. Syria will get the highlands over here that they want in exchange for them stopping their advances against Israel and joining the Orange Team, as well as gaining their official recognition from all Western countries. Syria agrees. They also say that they will get their land over here once once this is over. Also, I'm still covering this in as Orange occupation because it is technically occupied by the Syrians. However, this has happened now, and now that Syria has official support from the West, Turkic troops have begun entering into their country, cutting off the Iranians and Iraqis and pushing them back to their own border. I also need to. Now, Lebanon, they're gonna die now. The majority of it goes to the Lebanese. However, a another party, a new Lebanese government is formed and begins fighting against the Israelis and Syrians. Eventually, the West and Lebanese strike a deal to not fight anymore, and Syria begins their own invasion of Iraq. Now, seeing that this isn't working, that their plan isn't working too well, Iran begins minor plans to try to get more countries to be involved, but we'll see how that plays out. All of the coast controlled by the Houthis is taken by the Orange, the West, and they begin pushing farther into this area, taking over that and pushing farther into Yemen, sweeping down the coast. Saudi forces push farther in from north, the West increases their presence along the Eritrean and Djiboutian coast, even kind of leaking into Somalia and Ethiopia in some places. Also, they also take this Yemenese island, which I forgot to color in, and begin pushing farther in Yemen, officially cutting the purple Yemenis. They are the not rebellion Yemenis government in half and pushing against and officially taking over all of the Houthis. And then Yemen capitulates. The West starts, because of this, withdrawing their support. Well, not their support, their troops from here, kind of. They begin increased military operations in the Somaliland area, but this is not related to anything with Yemen. And in the parts that had to do with Yemen, they start slowly withdrawing their troops until eventually they're all gone. Now, this makes Iran hasten, well, they're hasten, hasten, make their plans, begin developing their plans faster to get more countries involved. However, they will officially implement them after a major event that takes place in the Iraqi front, which is the fall of Baghdad to Western forces as they continue their advances. So, Iran, who are they going to get involved? Now, the Orange, they don't really like Israel, but they don't like Iran either. So what do they do? But so Iran makes them actually get on a completely different side. They're still fighting Iran. Don't get me mistaken, but now they're also fighting Israel, and they've split off from the Western team. Also, I keep accidentally coloring in. Um, Now worried the West is, well, the West doesn't like this one bit, as expected. A whole bunch of their allies who controlled a whole lot of the territory under their occupation has just left and made a whole new side in this conflict. Um, so they make a deal with Syria that Syria will get the land they claim in exchange for leaving the war and not joining the Teal coalition. Syria agrees, taking the land that they want. The same deal is made with Lebanon getting full recognition and, per their request, a bit of northern Israel. Now, Israel, they don't like what the US and the West are doing, but they know it's necessary so that they don't lose this war, which is looking even more like they might. Also, I forgot to class again. This also, I forgot to say this, but this also means that this area is occupied by foreign forces now. The Syrians have now officially retreated from these areas. And so, the Iraqis, however, in a move that the West isn't too happy about, Syria hands over their control to the Teal coalition. However, the Teal don't want to bring Syria in on the Teal coalition, so they let it slide. The Teal meet up their fronts in Iraq and begin surrounding that. However, that wasn't the only trick Iran had up their sleeve. There are quite a few more. So, Oman has, in this timeline anyway, has become increasingly more pro-Iranian, and eventually they join the war on the side of Iran, especially after US threats that the Iranians didn't particularly enjoy. So this opens up a whole new theater in the south with the Omanis doing that. Now, the US and the West is losing its grasp over the um territories here in Yemen. And so, needing a better base to do it from, the US and the West re-enters their occupation of these areas, needing to that and begin pushing up against the Saudi Arabian countries. And so there. Um Now Iran knows they could get something out of this. And so a very, very surprising thing suddenly happens. The um the Middle Easterners unite in their hatred of Israel, form one united front. Palestine is freed. After this, Israel officially leaves the war. Um, the troops of the West retreat. However, the West keeps their presence over here. And now, let's look at this peace treaty. No, this Middle Eastern map looks totally different. Well, let's go over the changes. So, let's go from west to east, because why not? Um, like previously stated, Syria gets that. Lebanon gets that. We already did that change. Jordan expands and gets this area. Saudi Arabia expands that, getting roughly that area. Kuwait gets this. Iran, Iraq border didn't change. Iraq, um, Iraq keeps its original government, but it's like, um, falling apart. Doesn't have a coast anymore, so that's probably a problem for Iraq. But we don't care about Iraq anymore because we're going down here. The US and the other Western powers continue occupying this area, hopes that eventually they can one put jump on Yemen. Yeah, Yemen installed a new government and spit out by the Iraq blue. Saudi Arabia gets like that. Oman gets this, as well as this island over here. And now let's talk about the not map impacts of this change thing. There's more Saudi-Iranian cooperation, obviously, but yeah, the also this causes the economy of oil-relying nations in the Gulf to significantly fall apart. Why is this? You, as you might know, the Europeans get much of their oil from Russia, not the Gulf states. However, USA and Canada, I believe, get most of their oil from the Gulf states. This war would stop them from majorly buying that. Some companies and people still do. However, they now mainly rely on either Canadian oil from the West, US oil from the West, or the Gulf of Mexico, or in some rare cases in Alaska, Yukon, and British Columbia, Russian oil coming across pipes from the Asian continent, as well as oil coming up from South America becomes way more popular in the West, I mean South. So the US is kind of now divided between oil. Like, there's this some places all over here on the East Coast that still get Gulf oil from there. The southern states, not the states, but southern area, who get their oil either from oil things in this area or oil coming up from South America. And then the north, who gets its oil mostly from the US and things in this area or over here, or from oil in Canada. So that affects the economy of the Gulf states, causing all of these countries to go into deep recession. But anyway, there are probably no major Saudi-Iranian alliances formed after this. However, there is very increased cooperation and more European hate for the Middle East, and more Russian ties with not just Iran, but Iraq, Jordan, even Saudi Arabia, Oman, making the Middle East more pro-Russian than ever. And then a giant black void appears and swallows up the Middle East, so we don't have to look at it anymore. Just kidding. Um, there are also probably way other more impacts I don't think that I'm not talking about. But yeah, also Lebanon and Syria are increasingly more Western than in our timeline. And yeah. Well, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.